Okay, let's begin again.
I'm sorry.
So I am Barbara. I am the president this year of the Church Council. Kristen is a member at large. And like I said, there's more of us. Our names and pictures are on the bulletin board in the social hall if you want to see who everybody is. Current officers are Jeff Benson is our treasurer and Libby Elwood is our secretary. We currently do not have a vice president, which is a little strange this year, but we are getting through that. President and vice president are elected by the council, or by the congregation, sorry. And this year there was no vice presidential candidate, so no one was picked. So we're getting ready for, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're getting ready for nominating time for next year. So we can talk a little bit more if you're interested in terms and things like that. But actually, before we get going any further, I'm actually going to turn it over to John Sheppard. He's our Synod Council representative, and he's going to talk about what Synod Council is and does. And the reason we're going to stop right here and go to him is because he also has a commitment with the
Grand Avenue Christian Church.
Grand Avenue Christian Church, where he's leading worship today. So we're going to let him go first, and then he can get off to his other endeavor.
And I guess because of the way that's set up,
Yep.
Sure, I can see myself. I can see myself.
You can see yourself.
So good morning.
Good morning.
So as Barb said, I am the Crazy Mountain Cluster representative to the Synod Council. Now, what does that mean? So just like the congregation has a congregation council, all of the expressions of the church within the ELCA have councils. So we go from congregations to synods to churchwide. There's a council at every level. And within the Montana Synod, each of the different clusters, and there are 12 of them, they're elected at the assembly, but they elect representatives from their clusters to then to serve on the council. And there's a requirement that 60% of the membership of the council be lay, 40% clergy, and that we have gender parity. So we really try to be balanced. Now, what brought me to the council was a number of years ago, Tom Gossett, who was the vice president of the Synod, died, and Bishop Jessica Christ asked Dick Deshaw, who was our council representative, to take over as Synod vice president. And that opened up the seat on the council for our cluster. And so Jessica asked me to step in, and I did, and then 2 years ago I was actually elected. So technically I'm still in my first term, and I'm allowed to do 2.
How long are terms?
3 years. But by the time I'm done, I've only been on council for like 7.5 years. So it's kind of crazy. But it's been very interesting. It's been very good. So one of the things that we hear a lot from congregations is, what does the Synod do for me? There's a lot of uncertainty about the role of the Synod, the role of the Synod Council, how we actually interact in the ministries of the Synod, and so on. So that's part of what I'm going to be telling you about. I'll be focusing mostly on the most recent Synod Council meeting that just took place last weekend. In fact, we meet 3 times a year. 2 of those are at the Synod House in Great Falls, and then the 3rd time is right before Synod Assembly. And so, like I said, we just met last weekend. In fact, the first full day was a day of retreat. So we didn't do any business. We just got to know each other better because, every year a third of the council rolls off and new people come in. Ultimately, our responsibility is to do the work of the Synod between the assemblies. Because just like here, where the primary authority of what happens in this congregation comes from the membership, the same thing is true at the Synod level, where the authority of the administration comes from the assembly. But assembly only meets once a year. So we have to continue to do things between those assembly meetings, and that's what the council is set up to do. So, we do the typical things that, again, you do here with council. We manage and approve the budget, although ultimately the budget has to be approved by the assembly. But we will do kind of initial approval and then carry it forward to final ratification by the assembly. We oversee the Synod Calls. Now, a congregation is typically what calls a pastor or a deacon. But there are certain ministries that don't have congregations attached to them, and they are called by the Synod. For example, the Synod staff, the associate to the bishop, Jason Esselstein, is called by the Synod, and therefore we as a Synod Council actually oversee that call. There are the JP. Well, JP is a little bit unusual. Typically, Lutheran Campus Ministry, I'll explain why he's unusual in a minute.
There are so many reasons why he's unusual.
Oh, yeah. And those reasons are a blessing. But anyway, that would be a Synod call as well. JP is a unique situation because he's Presbyterian. And so we've ratified his call. However, he's technically called by the Presbyterian to serve in that role. The Freedom in Christ Prison Ministry is also administered by the Synod. And so we oversee that. St. John's Ministry in Ministries in Billings, same thing. A couple of years ago, the Synod Assembly passed 2 resolutions setting up task forces. The first one, well, in no particular order, the first one was devoted to racial justice. And they are working to provide educational materials and programs to assist in helping congregations better understand racial issues, even in Montana. We're predominantly a white state, but our primary non-white community is indigenous. And so there's a strong focus on how do we interact with indigenous peoples, how do we support indigenous peoples, and how do we improve awareness among the congregations about what their special issues are, so that we can best interact with them. The second one, and I am actually the Synod Council liaison to this one, is a task force on creation care in a changing climate. And we just call it the Climate Change Task Force for short, or the Creation Care Task Force for short. Same kind of mission, focused on education, focused on service, focused on providing programs. And as an example, and I know about that task force better than the other, we've produced a liturgy, and we've even used parts of the liturgy here that are focused on creation care. There's an initiative to support putting solar on churches, and what I find interesting is this congregation did it before the initiative began. But then Eric Youssef, who's the pastor in Bonner, actually is really keen on that idea, and they've since put solar in their church. We're looking at potentially putting solar on the Christus Collegium, and so on. So, and then we are also looking at a program working with the Western Sustainability, I forget the third word, but they're an organization that are looking at basically carbon credits, carbon offsets, in order to provide funding and support to ranchers to help them use more climate-informed practices on the ranches. So those are the kinds of things that the task force are doing, and they report to the Synod Council. We also do a lot in terms of supporting the bishop in her decision-making, in her ministry, in her support of the Synod. Some of them are not easy. As an example, if there are legal matters that arise, Bishop Laurie will, of course, consult with the Synod attorney, but any decisions that need to be made are brought to the Synod Council. And right now, I don't know how many of you are aware, but we are being sued by the Boy Scouts. And this is a lawsuit that is based on a sexual abuse case that happened back in the 70s that actually even predates the ELCA. And so we're pretty sure that our part of the lawsuit will be thrown out because we didn't exist at the time. And the congregation that was involved is no longer an ELCA congregation. But these are kind of the issues we have to deal with when looking at some of the matters that arise in the Synod.
That must be a lot of email kind of stuff, or do you have to get together for those things?
So there is a lot of email. One of the things that happened during COVID was because we weren't meeting the regular 3 times a year, we started having monthly Zoom meetings. We're not meeting monthly anymore, but with situations like this, if there's a need, then yeah, we call a Zoom meeting. So it generally is more than 3 times a year, even though that's the target. Congregations in transition. And by that, I mean certainly the bishop's office is focused primarily when there's a new call in process, but sometimes there are difficult situations where financially a congregation just can't continue its ministry. So what happens then? And there are procedures that congregations can follow for closing and dispersing money and so on, but sometimes that doesn't go very smoothly. And sometimes the congregations don't want to do that. They deny the fact that they're in this situation. And at that point, the Constitution allows for a supervisory care coming from the bishop's office. And there is a congregation that's in that mode right now. And so we're supporting the bishop in managing that as well. One of the things that I think is, I mean, the circumstances are unfortunate, but the outcome I'm hoping is going to be pretty cool. The pastor at our Savior's Rocky Boy left 6 months ago. Ish. And now they're without a pastor. The thing about that congregation, there are congregations on reservations in Montana, but it is the only one that is actually designed to serve the indigenous people. And so the Synod and the Council, and actually even church-wide, believe that there is some priority we need to put on that congregation in terms of trying to help them find a full-time pastor. A pastor that doesn't just come in and serve the congregation, but also has some kind of ties or roots to the indigenous community so that they can better resonate with what the community is going through. So we are in the process of putting together a partnership, and this was just discussed last weekend, where church-wide and the Synod will fund that ministry. There are still details that need to be worked out. There are going to be challenges when it comes to the call process itself, because this is not going to be a call that is going to bring in a senior level pastor, just financially. But at the same time, there are specific things that we think we need, and just the number of people either going through the seminaries or going through the teen program often don't have that background. So it's going to be a challenge, but it is becoming a high priority on the council. Lots of things related to new ministries that we're focused on. Some are not so new anymore, but they're still considered kind of in the mission stage. There's a ministry in Missoula called Confluence, which is not a traditional congregation, but it is a synodically authorized ministry where we're bringing together spiritual components with social action. And they've been in existence a few years, but it's still very much an emerging ministry. There are programs coming out of, what does DEM stand for?
Director of Evangelical Mission?
Yeah, Peggy Paulusinger is our Director of Evangelical Mission. We just call her the DEM. But she is supporting a program called Faithful Innovations. And Pastor Lindy, you probably know more about it than I do. But again, looking for ways to kind of bring life into the various ministries using different innovative techniques. And then lots of work going on in terms of interdenominational and interfaith ministries. And one of the success stories, I think, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Montana Jewish Project, but this was an initiative by the Jewish community in Helena to try to buy back the synagogue from the Roman Catholic Church. It's the oldest synagogue in Montana. And they made a deal with the Roman Catholic Diocese. They were given a deadline and a dollar amount. And through a special campaign and through the offerings of the last Synod Assembly, this Synod gave Well, as of the Synod Assembly, it was around $9,000, and in the end, I think it was over like $12,000 to that initiative. And we learned at the council meeting last week, they met their goal, and they're getting the synagogue back. And the thing that's particularly cool about that whole process is it's really strengthening the Synod's relationship with the Jewish community. And it's now opening doors where we can do ministry together. So that's, I mean, in a nutshell, that's what we do. Those are some of the things that we've worked on. I don't know if you have any questions. Yeah.
Is there a direct venue for churches to donate to the indigenous causes?
The easiest thing to do is to send your money to the Synod office and just identify where you want it to go. And then there are different categories funds set up to deal with that.
And that can be done through the congregation too, if you just indicate and Don's directors.
Thank you for serving.
Where is the synagogue?
Well, it's in Helena. I don't know what street it's on. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to go look it up.
Is that the big Catholic church there, or is it?
It was their administrative center.
Ah.
It's not a
Yep.
church.
Yep.
All right. Bart, that's all I
Thank
have to
you.
say. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Oh, one last thing. We are also in the process of revising and updating the classic vision, mission statement, except we've changed it. It's now a vision statement, a call statement, and values. And I thought I would share them with you real quick. The vision is just approved by the council. The vision, equipping ministry of the gospel, equipping for the ministry of the gospel. The calling is equipping the followers of Christ in Montana and northern Wyoming. By the way, I don't know if you knew that. We're not just Montana Synod. We're Montana, northern Wyoming Synod. For ministry of building up the body of Christ and living Christ's love into the world. And the values, there are 5. Proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ's grace and love for all, engaging in God's justice for the world, especially the least of these, walking humbly with God in all we do and say, which is based on Micah 6:8, pursuing unity and harmony with diversity across church and community, and promoting relationships and collaboration across the Synod and wider church. Yes?
How do new initiatives rise? Do they bubble up or do they trickle down?
They bubble up mostly. Generally, if there is a need that is identified within a community, they'll start looking for resources. If they need Synod support, they'll come to the Synod. Sometimes it can happen through resolutions at the Synod Assembly, but it really is more of a bottom-up process than a top-down one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, just an FYI, and that's true from between congregations and synods, but also between synods and church-wide. The process is the same. So the formal way that a congregation would speak to the Synod Assembly is through a memorial or by the writing of a resolution to be submitted by, congregations can submit resolutions at the Synod level that then have to go through the resolutions committee for Synod Assembly. But similarly, synods at Synod Assemblies can pass memorials to the church-wide assembly, that then the church-wide assembly memorials committee, they end up sometimes at the church-wide assembly, which now happens every 3 years, there's 65 synods in the ELCA, there might be 23 of them that all pass a memorial that is more the same than not, and so they lump them together, and pass them that way, because otherwise there'd be way too much business for a group of people to do anything. But so I mean, there are there's channels, right? There's formal ways for things to happen for congregations to talk to the Synod Assembly. If something doesn't need to be that formal, often it's a conversation in a congregation, and a pastor or a deacon or a Synod Council member or whatever says to the bishop or the DEM, hey, we have this idea, or this is important to us. I mean, there's lots of informal ways to communicate as well.
Right. And by the way, one of the interesting memorials that was passed at the most recent churchwide this past summer, and we don't know what the implications are yet, it was basically looking at reconstituting the ELCA, which is going to be a full new look at the organization of the church.
These first memorials, maybe might have got the wrong definition of the word, but it sounds kind of more like looking backwards and forward.
Yeah, I think that word is historical. In fact, we used resolution and memorial back in the LCA days, which is the church that I came from. Out here, it tends to be more ALC. I don't know if they use those terms or not, but I don't know the reason for that term, but it really is not intended to be backward looking at all. Yeah.
But that's the common understanding.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll trade with you.
Okay. One thing I want to make clear, let me find it again here real quick, I closed my book. Also, we had some more members of the council join us, so I'd like to introduce them. Katie Keir is on the council. Nicole is on the council, Nicole Anderson. And Barry Jivey is also on the council.
He was early.
I was here. So thank you for the coffee.
He's doing coffee and wrangling children. I saw him.
And Amy's here too.
And Amy's here. She is a member of the council. She is teaching. She's not here?
She actually not telling you.
She's actually not here. But she often teaches Sunday school, so even if she was here, she might not be here. So the council is governed by the congregation, but we also have a governance policy manual that we follow. So kind of like you were talking about, we have, rules and things and stuff we do. And I just wanted to read one part of it. The function of the council is to develop, monitor, and enforce governing policy, not to implement it. Except for delegating assignments of its own work to ministry teams, task force consultants, or officers, the council shall delegate authority only to the lead pastor. Any other subordinate employee or entity operating with the authority of the congregation shall receive that authority from the lead pastor or a person assigned such authority by the lead pastor. And I'm sorry I'm not the best person to explain that, but again, we do not implement the policy, but we do enforce it, develop it, and monitor it. Is that clear as mud? Does anybody need any more on that information? I think Lindeen has really good words if you need to clarify at all.
I can add one
Okay,
by way of explanation.
thank you.
It means that the council doesn't do everything, nor does the council micromanage everything. Right? So when we have the conversation about replacing the carpet down the hall, which is something we're probably going to need to do sooner than later because it's getting old and has had a lot of miles put on it by all those little preschool feet, the council will recommend to the congregation a spending plan, which the congregation then will modify to whatever extent, and then pass, right? And so then the council will say to me and to the building and grounds team, hey, let's get some new carpet down there then. And then the council will be out of it, right? The council's not going to spend council meeting time choosing carpet colors, right? Their job is to discern what is God calling us to do and be here in this place today and next week and in the next year, 5 years, and how do we get around our heads around that, and not to get stuck in the weeds.
So thank you for that. And does that lead into what you're going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm going to introduce Kristen again, and she's going to lead us in a little exercise.
Yeah.
Exercise.
Do pens for me, Barb?
Yep.
Pen or pencil. So everybody needs one of these.
You want to join the table, please, or do you have to leave?
I will be leaving soon. I'll just observe.
This will be great. This will go on your permanent passport.
Okay.
I was right there.
You may have to speak.
page that says Adult Forum with the CtK Council. And I'm going to start with our mission, and you can all please respond. You probably don't even have to look at your paper. Who are we? We are a Christian community practicing discipleship as we worship, learn, and serve. So, you may or may not be aware, we have a mission that we say every single Sunday, but then we also have vision and values. Our vision, is there somebody that wants to read that really loud?
Our vision, every member of partaking joyfully learning and living the way of Jesus, being transformed by and impacting the world through life-changing relationships with God, one another, and all creation.
Thank you. And if you're at home watching this later and you're really sad you don't have a worksheet, this is all on our website, so feel free to follow along. Beyond the vision then, or getting even finer, digging deeper in, our core values tell us that as a community of Christian faith, how we are defined. And again, these are not created by the council, but as a council, we're hoping to get some insights into what people are thinking and doing and wanting, and how we can help with that. So the chart here has 2 columns that aren't filled in, and I want each individual to do it. Don't start yet. We're gonna go row by row, and you are asked to fill in the first box what we're doing here at CtK already, or you can even think of it as what I'm doing already yourself, or what a small group that you're in is doing, or what you know as a congregation we are doing to address that value or support that value. And then the final column is what we could do, or you can say what I could do, or what my small group could do, but things looking ahead. How could we do even more or be even better at exemplifying that core value that we hold?